All right, we're getting into the week of atonement here. So, this is a big week for Jesus, right? Last week of his life, basically. And, I have kind of a different timeline view of this than the traditional Catholic timeline view. So, we'll kind of get into that as we get a little further along. But, this is building up to the cross, right? And there's a lot here. There's quite a lot of volume here of stuff, and as we move in that direction, we're going to begin to see how this kind of plays out, right? Number one, he goes back to Jerusalem, right? But this time his popularity is at its peak, I would say. This is the height of his popularity. People are looking at him to be the Messiah. They're looking at him to be the king. They're looking at him to do all those things that they think that he should do. Their expectation is high. He's coming back into Jerusalem. He's fulfilling prophecy here out of Zechariah. And because this is all becomes, there's so much prophecy, so much of a major body of prophecy that's fulfilled in this last week that it's almost inconceivable, to be honest. And this is kind of the beginning of it. Bethany is not far from Jerusalem. I'll show you that later on here. I've got a map for you so you can kind of see where that is. Bethany, of course, is where he stayed. Bethany is where Martha and Mary was. Simon the leper, we saw where his feet were anointed with oil or perfume at the house of Simon the leper. So that was all in Bethany. We know about the Mount of Olives. He said, go into the village opposite you, and you will find a colt tied there on which no one has yet ever sat. Untie it and bring it here. So this is, like I said, this is all prophetic. And it's a fulfillment of prophecy is why he does this, why he's not going to walk in, because generally he walked. But this is one time where he's not going to do that. He says that if anyone says to you, I wish Clyde was here, because Clyde always says they stole the donkey. So, but he says, if anyone asks you what you're doing, said the Lord, it needs to be, and immediately he'll send it back here. So they went. So I told Clyde, I said, no, actually, they were just borrowing the donkey. See, he wasn't stealing the donkey. He was just borrowing the donkey. So, but he said they went away and they found a colt and they untied it. And he says, what are you doing? And they spoke to him just as Jesus, and they gave him permission. So they had permission to take it. So all three Gospels record this. But Matthew says, it took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, gentle and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden. So this is really the beginning of this prophetic week, what's going to happen. So he's coming to them, and it says to him, behold, your king is coming. So this is one time where Jesus is coming as king. Not the king they expected, but he's coming as king. And this is that fulfillment of that prophecy. And they put their coats on the road. We call this Palm Sunday now, right? We call this Palm Sunday. So this was the Sunday of the week of atonement, right? So Saturday is the Sabbath, so they didn't do anything on the Saturday. So this would be Sunday morning. This would be the same morning we're on right now, Sunday morning. So he's coming in, and they were laying those palm trees down, they did that for royalty, their coats, kind of throwing out the red carpet, we would call it, but that was a sign that they saw him as king. They were putting this down for the donkey to ride on. He was on this foal, and they were cutting these palms. They were putting him in the road. So it was a huge deal. This is a huge procession coming in, and they're saying, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And Hosanna means pray, save us. That's what that really means. It means pray, save us. So that's what they were saying. Pray, save us, right? Pray, save us. In other words, they're looking to Jesus now as their king, as their salvation, the one who's going to take them out from underneath Roman rule. He's the one who's going to lead them back to their glory of Israel and Jerusalem. And, you know, a lot of Old Testament prophecy, if you really kind of just read it at that thing, that's what it says. Israel's going to be restored. Judah's going to, he's going to call them back. He's going to be a king. They're going to have all these things. That's a lot of Old Testament prophecy when it talks about Jesus. That's exactly what it's referring to in their mind. Of course, we understand that's a spiritual sense. But they didn't understand that, nor did they want to understand it that way. They were looking for relief from their oppression, relief from the Romans. And that's what they were looking for. And they were looking at Christ here to do that for them. The whole crowd of disciples began to praise God joyfully with loud voice for all the miracles which they had seen. They had saw this king. They saw the miracles that were performed. You know, there's so much here that points to Jesus being who Jesus is. Other people had risen up in his day and tried to be the Messiah, said they were the Messiah, and yet they never came to fruition. It never came to pass what was done. Jesus had fulfilled all these things that he had to do, and now he's coming up on this big week, and now he's fulfilling this prophecy, and they're looking at him to be the king. Blessed is the king who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, of course, the tide of public opinion, as we know, can shift rapidly, which is what's going to happen here. But this is a mountaintop moment, right? I mean, this is a big thing, I think. And I think it really demonstrates the popularity and what Jesus had come to by this time. And that was because of what? Because of the miracles, because of the teaching, because of the words, because of what he had done. Jesus had become a huge figure, hadn't he? And if you really think about it and put yourself back into the first century, get yourself out of our time. We live in a time when news travels faster than it happens, just about, right? And we live in a time where people can rise to fame on the internet or whatever in just a little bit. But you got to remember, this is a time when things had to travel word of mouth, by what people seen, by what people attested to. Jesus' popularity had come within 3 years, right? Ministry of Jesus, about 3 years, about a year and a half. That was really what we would consider like active ministry when he called his apostles, about a year and a half. And in that amount of time, Jesus had risen to the pinnacle of popularity. That's a really big thing. That's not an accident. That doesn't just accidentally happen. Not in this world, not in that world. That was a big thing. And it really attests to the miracles that Jesus did were true. The things he were doing was exactly what was said. There's a lot of proof in this for us, for me and you. And he said, some of the Pharisees in the crowd shouted out, and this is going, I'm not going. This is going back into Luke only. Rebuke your disciples. Why? Why were they saying that, do you think? Why were the Pharisees? When he said rebuke your disciples, do you think he just meant the apostles? Who do you think they meant here? What's the word disciple mean? Follower, right? So I don't think it's specific to the apostles here. I think it's everyone, the crowd basically, to rebuke them. Why? Why don't they want them to do this? I mean, it looks like this is what the Pharisees have been wanting all along, for Jesus to come in and be king, right? They weren't what now? You mean the Pharisees weren't, or the? Yeah, I think it was they were a little scared of him, weren't they? I mean, he's, at this point, very powerful, right? He's got a lot of people on his side. Truth is, he hasn't really been very kind to the Pharisees, right? I mean, if you really look back, he's kind of been kind of hard on them, right? You brood of vipers, right? Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you'll in no way enter the kingdom of heaven. He's been pretty hard on the Pharisees, hasn't he? And now he's got all these people that are like flogging to him. And the Pharisees are a little scared. Wouldn't you be? You know, what's he going to do? Right? What's his plan? What's his game plan? He hadn't told us, right? What's his plan here? You know, are they going to raise these people up and overthrow the Jews, Jerusalem, or the temple as we know it? Or, you know, is he going to throw us out, or what's he going to do? You know, we're not included in this. And so we need, you know, tell him to be quiet, right? And he says, even the stones will cry out. And I think that's a reference to, he says, even from these stones, God can raise up children to Abraham, you know. Even these stones will cry out. And he says, he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city, he wept over it. And he said, if you had known in this day, even you, the things which make for peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will throw up a barricade against you and surround you and hem you in on every side, and they will level you to the ground, and your children within you, and they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. Well, so if you play devil's advocate on this, right? If they had really accepted Jesus for who he was, right? Do you think that Jerusalem would have survived, that they wouldn't have been destroyed? Varying opinions on that. The truth is, if they would have really took Christ for what he was and really rejected Judaism, I'm not going to say Jerusalem would have survived for ever, but I'm going to say that Rome wouldn't have taken Jerusalem because they wouldn't have had a reason to. The reason Jerusalem was leveled in 71 AD was because the zealots, the Jewish zealots, rose up to fight to contest Rome. They were to take it back for themselves. And the emperor sent, am I going to get this wrong? I should know that. What was his name? Anyway, was it Titus or Domitian? Titus. Sent Titus, right, to siege Jerusalem. And he sieged Jerusalem, and that's when everybody starved to death, and that's what Jesus was talking about. And then in 71 AD, Jerusalem was leveled to the ground. So because they rejected him, and because they stayed their course, yeah, bad things happen. So now we go to Monday in the morning. So Sunday was his triumphal entry, Palm Sunday we call that, triumphal entry in Jerusalem. And then Monday is when he apparently went back to Bethany, which is where I think he was staying, because he probably staying with Mary and Martha or staying in that house. It was fairly close. It was a Sabbath day's journey, right? About a half a mile, right? Wasn't very far away. So he went to there, and he stayed with them, and he became hungry. It says, seeing a lone fig tree by the road, he came to it, found nothing on it. And he said, no longer shall there ever be any fruit from you. And at once the fig tree withered. So once again, his disciples, it says, and his disciples were listening. This is interesting, isn't it? In John's gospel, the cleansing of the temple is how it starts. That's almost the very first thing Jesus does is cleanses the temple. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the cleansing of the temple is right at the end. So there's a lot of discussion about that. Did Jesus cleanse the temple twice? Right? Or is John just chronologically challenged? We know John is chronologically challenged. We understand that. You know, did John just put it at the front for another reason? I don't know. I mean, it appears there were probably two cleansing of the temples, maybe. I don't know. I've always kind of struggled with this a little bit. But John puts it right at the beginning. Happens right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. One of the very first things Jesus does, he goes in, he cleanses the temple. Matthew, Mark, and Luke use it like a hinge point to the cross right at the end. So I don't have a good answer for you. Maybe twice. Maybe once. Why is it the beginning of John, the end of Matthew, Mark, and Luke? If there's once, maybe when did it happen? Oh, I don't know the answer to that question. Don't have a good answer. Does anybody want to chime in on that for me? Does anybody have the knowledge to tell me if there's two or not? Most scholars think it happened twice. Personally, I kind of struggle with the idea that Jesus did this twice, but maybe he did. I don't know. What do you think, Bill? That's right. And a lot of times chronologically, things got jumbled in the mix. A lot of times they put things in for emphasis, so we don't know. If I had to guess, I would say it happened at the end. I think this makes more sense than necessarily at the beginning. But, who knows, I guess. Jesus entered the temple. We know this story. He drove them out. I think it's interesting. And there's some differences in here in John. Subtle differences between this and John's gospel. I guess I should have put John up there. In John, it happens in John chapter 2. The Passover of the Jews was near. Jesus went up to Jerusalem, found in the temple those who were selling oxen and doves and money changers, sitting at tables. In John, which it doesn't say this in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it says in here, he said to them, you're making a robber's den. Right here, if you read, it says, he began to drive out those who were buying and selling in the temple and overturn the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves who would not permit anyone to carry merchandise. In John, he says that he made a scourge of cords and drove them all out of the temple. With the sheep and the oxen, he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables, and those who were selling doves said, take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business. His disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. And the Jews then said to him, what sign do you show us your authority for doing these things? And Jesus said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. So in John's gospel, he made a scourge of cords. I thought that was always fascinating to me. Because when you think about anger, and you think about Jesus' anger in this, and you say, well, anger can be a sin, but of course we know Jesus didn't sin. He didn't harm anybody in this, apparently. It doesn't show that he ever harmed anyone. He did harm their merchandise, maybe. There's arguments. Scholars always say, well, he didn't even do that. He just turned them over, drove it out. He didn't really harm anything. But I always thought John was fascinating because in John it says he made a scourge of cords. And in my mind, I always thought, how premeditated that was, In other words, it wasn't rage. It wasn't just he went off on him. He determined to do this. This wasn't something that Jesus walked in and just said, I've had enough, He went there with that. He went there to do that. I mean, it was premeditated. He was doing that to make a point. It was a righteous anger, and he did it to demonstrate to them what they were doing was wrong, and that he wasn't going to allow for that, and that it was his Father's house. So when we a lot of times we see this story, and maybe we, see Jesus erupting in this fit of rage, but I would more say this was more of a controlled burn, right? I mean, he knew what he was doing. He didn't overdo it, right? He didn't injure anybody. He didn't go in there to hurt anybody, but he did go in there absolutely to make a point, and he was going to do that in a violent way. But he was going to do it also in a controlled way. So there's a lot of lessons in that. But I think when you read John, and you don't, like I said, you don't get it here in the Synoptics, but when you read John's gospel, he made a scourge of cords. I always wondered, how long did it take him to do that? I don't know what that means exactly. I don't know that I know I've never made a scourge of cords. I don't even know that I would know how to do that. But I know it would take some time to do that. And in that time, he's thinking, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm going to do it. Very premeditated in John's gospel. You don't see it here. This is more going in, turning it over, driving it out. But John gives this real premeditated idea to the whole thing. So did it happen twice? Maybe. Possibly. I think at this point they probably would have said, not again. Right? I mean, if this was the second time. But did it happen twice? Yeah, maybe. He says, my house shall be called a house of prayer to all the nations, and you have made it a robber's den. And it was. It was corrupt. The whole thing was corrupt. I mean, Jesus was absolutely righteous in what he did here. This is a corrupt system. People came to do their sacrifices. They sold them their sacrificial animals. They charged them probably way too much money. They had to change their money to drachma, to temple money. They charged them an exchange rate to do that. It was corrupt. The whole thing was corrupt. It was all about money. It wasn't about God. It was all about money. And Jesus was right in accusing them and right in doing this because it was righteous. And Jesus was righteous in what he did. But I think it also gives a side of Christ that oftentimes maybe we don't see. And yet in Matthew, if you look at Matthew's account here, it says the blind and the lame came to him in the temple and he healed them. You see, he wasn't just mad the whole time, right? I mean, this transpired. He healed them. The chief priests, scribes saw the wonderful things. The children who were shouting in the temple, Hosanna to the Son of David, they became indignant. And they said to him, do you hear what these children are saying? And Jesus said, yes, have you never read out of the mouth of infants and nursing babies, you have prepared praise for yourself? Over and over we see Jesus bringing up the Old Testament, bringing up these prophecies, bringing this up to them. They became indignant, right? Jesus relished children. He took time for children. Children came and sat on his laps. He put their hands on them. He said, forbid not the children to come to me because the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. And this is a society where children were looked down upon. Well, children are always kind of looked down on, right? They're always kind of looked over. And Jesus didn't do that. Jesus took time to look at the children and to know who they were and boy, what a lesson for us in that, What a tremendous lesson for us. And I know, I don't know how to say that, but, our children are so important and they need to know who you are. You need to take time to talk to them a little bit. That's just Rex's opinion, but I'm just saying. Children, they love that. Kids love for somebody to pay attention to them. More than anything on earth, that's what they want. They want somebody to pay attention. That's all they want. And we need to make that effort to know our children. I think when I was a child growing up, it seems like I always kind of, in churches, you always kind of got overlooked by the people who mattered, Isn't that what was happening here exactly? Isn't that what Jesus was criticizing them for? He says, you're not above the children, are you? You're not. No, right? Anyway, just a side note, but man, take time to know our children. Take time to know their name and to introduce yourself to them. And it doesn't take you that long to do that. And it might not mean a lot to you, but it means a lot to them for kids to know you, know who you are. And it's important, I think. I think Jesus taught a valuable lesson here. And the children loved Jesus, didn't they? The chief priests and the scribes heard this. They began seeking how to destroy him. And that really started with Lazarus. And we don't get Lazarus in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We're going to have to get to John, right? The raising of Lazarus, that's a John thing. Now, why that's not in Matthew, Mark, and Luke? Like you say, poetic license, I don't know, it's not there. But you got to get to John to see the raising of Lazarus. So you're kind of missing a little piece of the puzzle because really, according to John's gospel, that's when they really started trying to kill him, was when he raised Lazarus. So that the raising of, in John's gospel, the raising of Lazarus is the turning point. In the Synoptics, the cleansing of the temple is the turning point. So John's gospel plays different. And if you go here, it says, okay, he cleansed the temple, they went in there, they were indignant, and now they're trying to seek how to destroy him. John kind of says, John's gospel, when he raised Lazarus, they were like, oh, well, we're going to get rid of this guy. That's when they started trying to figure out how they were going to kill him. So does that mean it's two, no, it's not really in conflict with each other, but it's just a different perspective, different point of view on kind of how this series of events played out. There's a lot of things in John you just don't get in the Synoptics, right? The woman anointed him with the oil. We talked about that last week. The woman that anointed him in John's gospel, it says it was Mary. So, John talks about the raising of Lazarus. You only get what we call doubting Thomas, that story, only in John's gospel. So there's a lot of things that we don't get when we're going through Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's a lot of things you don't see here because it's not here, right? Because John has a lot of new material. So we don't see that turn here, but now we see the turn. The Synoptics use the cleansing of the temple as that big turning point that's going to lead basically to his crucifixion. They were hanging on every word he said, it says here. And then he goes back to Bethany. And when evening came, they would go out of the city. During the day he was teaching in the temple. In the evening he would spend the night on the mount that is called Olivet. In Matthew, it says he left them, went out of the city to Bethany, and spent the night there. So he wasn't staying in Jerusalem. He would stay sometimes on the mount, on the Mount of Olives, we call that, Olivet, it says in the scripture. Or he would return to Bethany, to the house of Martha and Mary and people that he knew there, where he was comfortable there. He would return to there, and then he would come back to Jerusalem. So this is where Bethany is, right here, and that's the Mount of Olives. So you can see it's not really a bad text, okay? It's not like saying two different places. You kind of be like almost saying the same. You see what I'm saying? You could refer to it in the same sense, same thing. So Bethany and the Mount of Olives are right there together. But he would go out of Jerusalem, and he would stay there, and then he would come back into Jerusalem, and then you can see the scale down there on the miles. That far is a mile or 5 miles. I think it's actually, that's 5 miles, that amount of distance. You can see Bethany is, I think, about 2 miles from Jerusalem. I believe that's right, 2 or a little over miles from Jerusalem. So that's a doable walk, right? 2 miles. That's not out of reason. So he would go there at night, spend the night, and then he would come back into Jerusalem during the day, because now we're into Tuesday. Okay. Now we're into Tuesday. So it's been a busy week, right? Went in Palm Sunday. Went in Monday, cleansed the temple, taught in the temple, healed the lame and the sick, went back to Bethany. Now we're to Tuesday, okay? This is where things are going to get confusing. Or I think, well, not really, but anyway, I have a different view of this. So, seeing the withered, teaches on faith, prayer and forgiveness. It says, seeing this, the disciples are amazed. How did the fig tree wither all at once? Remember? He just cursed the fig tree, right? Now they're coming back, and the fig tree has withered, but look at how it withered, right? It said it withered from the roots up, right? Trees don't do that, do they? They wither from the top down, right? And that's kind of interesting, because if you look, I think it's probably not a parallel to this, but I think it's interesting, because when the veil of the temple was tore, right, it was rent from top to bottom, the scripture says, right? The way it shouldn't have went. And here the tree withered the way it shouldn't have went, from the roots up. And it withered in a day. And Peter said, Rabbi, referring to his teacher, look, the fig tree you cursed is withered. And Jesus answered, saying to them, have faith in God. He says, truly I will say, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up, cast in the sea, does not doubt in his heart, but believes that he is going to happen, it will be granted to him. This is, I think, uniquely to his apostles here, to those following him right here, and he's trying to tell them the power that they're going to have, and they are going to have, through their relationship with God. And he says, all things you ask in prayer, believing you will receive, they will be granted. So Jesus using this as an example to them to say, have faith. What you ask, you're going to be given. Have faith that God can deliver it. I think it's uniquely, and I agree we have power in prayer and the power to do things through prayer. I'm not saying that we don't, but I really think this was uniquely an apostle moment where he was really trying to encourage them that it was going to be okay. Jesus really starts to encourage those that are following him the closer we get to this cross. If you really look here and you look especially in John's gospel, he's really encouraging them because he knows what's going to happen to them. He knows what's coming. And Jesus is trying to give them encouragement to pursue and do those things that they need to do. I think it was a hard week for Christ because he knows what's going to happen. He knows where this is going. But I think, and I can't speak from my experience because this obviously never happened to me, but I've been around a lot of people who were facing death imminently. And it's kind of interesting, most of the people I know, as they got closer and closer to dying, they were not as worried about themselves as they were worried about those around them, right? I mean, I've seen that my whole life with people because I've watched a lot of people die, unfortunately. And every time that I've been around that, most of the time I've been around that, when people would call me and want to talk to me and speak to me before they died, they didn't ask me about themselves. They asked me, well, who's going to take care of my kids? Who's going to take care of my wife, my husband? Who's going to do this? Who's going to, they're worried about that because we worry about the people we leave behind, don't we? I know I do. I mean, dying's all right, I guess. I mean, it's going to happen. But, I'd like to have things where it wasn't a burden on my family when I died. I'd like for them not to have to deal with the mess I leave behind, more or less. Jesus wanted them to be encouraged. He was worried about them, worried about what was going to happen to them. He knew it was going to be hard on them. And as hard as it was going to be on him, he knew it was going to be that hard. It was going to be hard on them too. And he was trying to encourage them to stay faithful, encourage them to do what they needed to do. And more as we get into especially in this last week, he's really pushing the encouragement on them. And I wish you could see it more here. And when we do John, and we're going to do John after this, when we do John, you're really going to see it because John spends a tremendous amount of his gospel in the last week of Jesus' life. I mean, a tremendous volume of John is the last week of the life of Christ. So you really maybe get a better picture in John than you do here of this last week. They came again to Jerusalem, walking the temple. What authority are you doing these things? Who gave you the authority to do it? And Jesus said, I'll ask you one question, and you answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Jesus, of course, as Jesus does, turning it on them, and he asked them a question. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from men? Answer me. Interesting question, isn't it? Was the baptism of John from heaven or from men? Well, of course, we kind of know the answer for that, don't we? It was from heaven. They didn't want to say that. But they knew they was in a bad spot. They began reasoning with themselves, saying, if we say from heaven, he will say, then why did you not believe him? Right? But he says, if we say it's from men, they were afraid of the people because everyone thought John was a prophet. So they didn't know how to answer. They said, well, if we say it's from God, then Jesus is going to say, well, why didn't you pay attention? Why don't you believe me? Right? But if you say it's from man, then the people are going to be against him because the people thought it was from heaven. The people thought John was a prophet. So they answered, they did not know. And Jesus says, I won't tell you by what authority I do these things. It's interesting how Jesus turned that around on them, isn't it? Once again, Jesus turned it around. Authority to do what things? Authority to heal. He threw over the money changers' temples. It's interesting. They didn't arrest him for that, didn't they? They didn't do anything to him for that. Isn't that kind of interesting? Because his popularity, he was so popular, they knew they couldn't get away with it. This is a really hard time for them. They're trying to figure out how they're going to handle this, what they're going to do with him, and that's a confusion for them. And then in Matthew, he says, a man had 2 sons. So they asked him what authority. He says, I'm not going to answer you about what authority. So Jesus said, I'm going to give you this parable. He says, a man had 2 sons. And the first son, it said, go to work today in the vineyard. And he answered, I will not. But afterward, he regretted it and went. And the man came to the second and said the same thing. And he answered, I will, sir. But he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of his father? And they said the first. And Jesus said to them, truly I say to you that the tax collectors and prostitutes will get into the kingdom of God before you. So what he's saying is that those that are going to come to Christ, even though they rejected him, they're going to be the ones that are going to be saved. A lot of them are going to say they're going to, but they never will, and they're going to be lost. So Jesus is making this comparison to them. And he says, John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes did believe him. And you, seeing this, did not even feel remorse afterwards so as to believe him. If you read the account of John doing John's baptism, the Pharisees and the scribes and the Jews were coming out to be baptized of John. Right? He was baptized. That's what the gospel said. The Pharisees were coming out and John was baptizing them. But guess what? They're like the second son. Right? The second son said, I will, sir, but he did not go. You see? The first one said, oh, I reject that. I'm not going to do it. But then they came back, and they did do it. So he says, listen, the tax collectors and prostitutes that have remorse so as to believe in him, even though at first they didn't follow him, they're the ones that did the will of God, not you. You didn't do the will of God because you repented. You went and were baptized by John. He baptized for your repentance, but you didn't do it. So it says you're lost. But these ones who did turn and change and really were repentant, they're the ones that are going to be saved. Over and over, Jesus says, it's not your name, it's not your background, it's not your genealogy, it's what you are in your heart that's going to save you. And that never changed throughout this gospel. Jesus, we're getting into a series of parables, teaching in the temple, scribes and the Pharisees there. Boy, that has a hard audience, don't you think? That was a hard audience, I think. Seeing those who hated you, wanted to kill you in the audience, wanted to kill you in the audience. Seeing those who were hanging on your every word, who wanted to hear what you had to say. And Jesus in the middle of it. Boy, it's a fine line he's walking here, isn't it? Really, I mean, he's kind of walked into the enemy's house in a sense and is talking about God. And I think that's it's just an amazing week, an amazing day. This day, Tuesday. Now, as we get next week, which maybe you've heard me teach on this before, I don't know, but we're going to talk about my view of the last few days of God or Christ. And it's a little bit different than what you've probably been raised up with if you've never heard me teach on that. But we're building to that. He said a man planted a vineyard and put a wall around it, dug a vat, built a tower, rented it out. The harvest time came, sent a slave to the vine growers in order to receive some of the produce. So in this parable, of course, parables never use names. We talked about that, right? It's just a man. He planted a vineyard, dug a wall around it, dug a wine press. He sent a slave to the vine growers in order to receive some of the produce of the vineyard. The slave here would be Jesus. God planted the vineyard. Jesus comes. He's a slave that's coming to get some of the produce of it. But they took him, they beat him, they sent him away. He sent sent him again another slave. They wounded him in the head, treated him shamefully. He sent another, they killed. Well, actually, it's the prophets here we're talking about. So God sent all these different people to him, right? Sent all these prophets to him, sent John the Baptist to him, sent all these people to him. And every one of them, they rejected him, they killed him. So eventually in this story, he's going to send his beloved son, which will be Jesus. Last of all, they will respect my son. But the vine growers said to one another, this is the heir, let's kill him. The inheritance will be ours. They killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. So this is a story of the kingdom, right? God planted it. God dug a well around it. God put a vat in it. He sent all these slaves to tell them how to live, tell them what to do. All these prophets, sent John the Baptist to them. All these prophets they killed. You know, the Jews revered the prophets, but they killed all those. They killed most of those prophets, right? Poor old Jeremiah, man. You know, what a guy, right? I mean, Jerusalem's going to get destroyed. Jeremiah's trying to do the right thing. God's telling Jeremiah what to write. Jeremiah says, listen, get along, right? To the king of Israel. He says, make a deal with the Babylonians. Pay them what they want. Make a deal. King of Israel says, no, I'm not going to do that. So he tears, that was a bad thing. So he tears up, is Jackie here? No. So he tears up the prophecy of Jeremiah. He tears it up, throws Jeremiah in a cave, right? And Jeremiah writes it again, presents it to him again, and then he still doesn't listen to Jeremiah. And then eventually Jerusalem gets destroyed. Poor Jeremiah, he's in a grotto in the destruction of Jerusalem, and he writes Lamentations, and then he winds up in Egypt, right? I mean, they treated these prophets terrible. They didn't listen to them. They didn't want to hear what they had to say. John the Baptist was beheaded. Do you see why Jesus kept bringing this up to them? He says, look at your history. Look at what you've done over and over and over and over. You haven't listened to God. And now he sends his son to you, and guess what? You're not going to listen to him either. You're going to kill him. Even though he sent his son to you, you're going to kill him too. So what did the owner of the vineyard do? He will destroy the vine growers and will give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, may it never be. Said, bring those wretches to a wretched end. He rent out the vineyard to other vine growers who will pay him the proceeds at the proper seasons. So that's us, right? And he told them this ahead of time, and they did not believe him. The stone the builders rejected will become the chief cornerstone, he says. And that's referring to him. Thanks for your time this morning.